Okay, so let me now get started with supply and demand. Okay, uh, so you're going to see a graph that looks a whole lot like this one down at the bottom of the screen that's going to represent a market and the two sides of the market, the buyers and sellers. I'm going to talk about the parts of this model starting today and continuing into next week. Okay, so first, I want to define some vocabulary. Okay, a market is, in our simple model, there is a collection of buyers and sellers of some good or service. And we're thinking of a good or service in this simple model that is all the same. Um, so not like not like selling uniquely different types of artwork, where each piece of art is different from the others. We're thinking more in lines of just a simple commodity like milk, okay, or bread, or gasoline, or um, widgets. I will keep talking about widgets as a generic good. Okay, so it's a collection of buyers and sellers of a good or service, and this will be a market economy in that there is a price in the economy. People agree to exchange the good for a certain amount of money. Okay, so price. This is the cost to buy, or the money to the seller. And in our model, there will just be simply a single price for this commodity in the whole market. And, think of, again, like gasoline. Or gasoline I mentioned because it's easy to see prices. And fairly simply, all the gas stations charge more or less the same price. Okay? It's about $2.55 this morning. I saw a little bit of variation, but it's about $2.55 a gallon right now. And for the sake of simplicity, our market just has a single price. We'll talk about where that price comes from. Okay, and then we talk about the quantity that is sold. Okay, so again, it's a good. We think of it as something you can purchase in units and increments. And really the question is, how much do we sell? Again, like gasoline. How many gallons of gasoline do we purchase? Okay, so now this model will be a market with perfect competition. That means really three or four things. One is it is a homogeneous, let me do away with that word. Okay, an identical good. Okay, everyone is selling the same thing, and think of gasoline. All the different gas stations are selling more or less the same regular unleaded gasoline. Um, Probably few of us think there's a substantial difference between Exxon gas and Shell gas and BP gas. It's all the same thing. Or milk. You go to the store to buy a gallon of milk, and like 2% non-organic milk. It it's all the same, right? That's what I mean by a homogeneous product or a really identical product. Everyone's selling the same thing. Um, Second, there are many buyers and sellers. Okay. Um, So again, gasoline and milk are probably great examples. There are many people who go out and buy gasoline every day, lots and lots of consumers of gasoline. There are lots and lots of sellers of gasoline. In other words, it's not a market that is dominated on one side by a single buyer or a single seller. Um, in contrast to, for example, here in, let's say, Elon, North Carolina, there is a single buyer of professors' labor. Yeah, if you like, the labor market is a market where we buy and sell goods and services, and the hiring side, the employing side of the market, is dominated by a single employer, this university. Okay, so that's not a competitive market with many buyers and sellers. Okay, and so one thing this means is that everyone will be a price taker. Okay. That means that everyone pays the price that is being charged in the market or receives the price in the market. No one can specify their own price. Okay, so again, think of, let's say, gas stations. You drive down the road and you see that the gas stations are all charging $2.55 a gallon. If you stop at one gas station and go inside and talk to the clerk and say, hey, I'll buy gas from you for $2 a gallon. Nah, I'll buy it for $2.54. Okay, how about that? They're just going to say, forget about it. We'll find someone else who's willing to pay $2.55. We have no shortage of customers. You cannot set your own price that you're going to pay for gasoline. There are other customers who will purchase it from the company. The same is true for the company, the seller. If there are a whole bunch of gas stations along the road, they're all charging the same $2.55 a gallon for gasoline, and one of them decides, nah, I'm going to set my own price, $3 a gallon, or even just $2.56. Right? If they set their own price that's different from what the rest of the market is charging, customers will just drive past them and fill up at the next station where the price is cheaper. And by the way, they also have no incentive to reduce their price below what the competition is charging. They will have plenty of customers. There's no shortage of customers. So they don't have a need to charge any less because they'll be able to sell as much as they want at $2.55. Okay, that's our very simple model with many, 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 many buyers and many, many, many sellers. And everyone just accepts that there's going to be what we call an equilibrium price. The final thing here is perfect information. Okay, that makes, so these things kind of make it a competitive market. Now, a couple of terms to define. The quantity demanded, should say quantity demanded at a price is the amount that consumers are willing and able to purchase at that price. Okay, so the quantity demanded, okay, is an important term. Okay, and again, it's how much consumers are willing and able to purchase at a price. Quantity supplied is really the same thing. for the seller side of market, the amount that producers are willing and able to produce or sell at a price. Now, it is important to realize that the quantity supplied is and the quantity demanded are functions of the price. So I have a buddy who's been bugging me because he wants to buy my car, or one of my cars. I have an old Jeep, and he's like, I love that thing. I want that thing. And he's like, how much are you going to sell it to me for? How much are you going to sell it to me for? And I was just like, I'm not selling it. And then I realized I am such a bad economist. Of course I would sell it at the right price. And so I just need to think of at what price would I be willing to sell it? And so I gave him a ridiculously high price. And it's like, that's my final offer. Okay. So that shut him up. Okay. But I told him what I'd be willing to sell it for. And, basically, as far as I'm concerned, at a price below, I think I said 75,000, which is about 7 times what it's worth. Okay. At a price below that, I'm not willing to sell it. At a price above, what did I say, 70,000, I am willing to sell it. So it's a function of the price. Okay. So I'm going to start with a model of demand. And I have a bunch of people in this economy. I just gave them names: Ann, Bob, Chris, Dan, and so forth. And what are they purchasing? Hamburgers. Okay. They are at least considering purchasing hamburgers. And everyone has a willingness to pay. I kind of think of this as being based on how much happiness you get from eating a hamburger. And I do think of happiness as something that we can kind of measure with money, that we can say dollars worth of happiness. Okay? So think of this. Imagine you're walking down the sidewalk and you see a dollar bill lying on the ground and you pick it up. It makes you a little bit happy, right? If you're walking down the road, you see a $5 bill lying on the ground, you pick it up, it makes you even happier. You see a $100 bill, even happier. Yeah? And why does it make you happy? Well, if we're going to be good economists, we're going to say because it can buy you stuff. Finding $1 on the ground, that's one candy bar. Buying a $5 bill on the ground, that's 5 candy bars, or whatever you like to spend your money on. But we can just talk about things in terms of dollars worth of happiness. Okay. So Anne, she would get $10 of happiness from a hamburger. I mean, Anne is probably hungry and she loves hamburgers. They're her favorite food. And she would be willing to pay $10 for a hamburger. Okay. And so forth. Bob, pretty darn hungry, likes hamburgers, willing to pay $9. Okay, so I'm sort of setting up this story as an example of where the demand curve for an economy could come from. I'm telling a story where simply there are different consumers who have different values that they place on a hamburger. Okay, it's just one sort of story to motivate what will be a demand curve in a minute. Okay, so are we clear on this? The next step here, I will come up with a table showing the quantity demanded at different prices. Okay, how many hamburgers would consumers want to purchase If the price were $10, okay, so we look down this list. Who's willing to pay $10 for a hamburger? Anne, right? That's one person. So if the price were $10, there'd be one person willing and able to purchase a hamburger. If the price of hamburgers were $9, how many people would be willing and able to purchase hamburgers? Not just one. Two. Yeah, Anne and Bob. Right? There'd be two people willing to purchase hamburgers at a price of $9. At a price of $8, now we have Ann, Bob, Chris, and Dan. Okay, so there are four people who'd be willing to purchase hamburgers at a price of $8. And so forth. Let's see. Price comes down. If the price were $7, there would be 6 people. And through Felix, if the price were $6, there would be 9 people. And if the price were $5, all 13 people here would want to purchase hamburgers. So what we have on the right, this table represents the demand. Okay. And the demand is telling us the quantity demanded at each price. There are 2 ways that we show the demand for an economy, or we can express demand for an economy. One is a demand curve in a graph. The other is a demand, I forget what the textbook calls this. I'm going to call it a demand table that I've just written up here. I think the textbook might call it a demand schedule. But when we say demand, it refers collectively to, at each price, how much people are willing to pay, not at a specific price. It's a list of all the different prices. Okay, now, next step, I want to translate this into a graph. Show that demand demand curve. So, let me start with a graph. These graphs will become super familiar. We graph a market. In this case, let me put a title on here, the market for hamburgers. Okay, we create a graph. On the vertical axis is price. On the horizontal axis is quantity. Please, if you're drawing a graph like this, label your axes so it's clear what is on them. And then I put some grid marks here. Let's do like 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 dollars. Okay, and then quantities. Let's see, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. Okay, so it's going to be a graph. I'm going to graph these points in this demand table. Okay, and so for example, this point, this first thing, at a price of $10, the quantity demanded would be 1. Okay, so my graph, I put that point right here. Price of 10, quantity of 1. If you see those little faint dotted lines there, that's just to sort of help orient you in the grid and point out this is like 1 and it's across from 10. Okay, so I've graphed that first point. Then I graphed the second point. At a price of $9, the quantity demanded would be 2. Okay, so I go to $9, go across and up from 2, and that's this point right here. Okay, keep going. So I've now graphed those first 2 points. Now the third point, at a price of $8, the quantity demanded would be 4, so I put a point there. And okay, so graph those first 3 points, and going like this. Okay, so now I've got all the points in this demand table plotted in the graph. Okay. Now, the next step would be just connecting the dots. And they all lie along some line or some curve. This is the demand curve for this economy. Okay, got it? Okay, it's called a demand curve. Now, often when we talk about markets, we're not going to be plotting points. We're just thinking of the demand curve, or we just like slap down a line in our picture and say, this curve represents the hypothetical demand for widgets. Okay, but I'm telling you all a little story so you understand kind of what this represents. And you can think about some things like all these points are really indicating someone's value from consuming hamburgers. And I'll refer back to that. And so you understand where this comes from. Now, when we graph a demand curves, the one rule for them is that they slope down. Okay? They slope down. In other words, as price decreases, quantity demanded increases. This statement is known as the law of demand. The cheaper something becomes, the more of it consumers are willing and able to purchase. It seems like a fairly uncontroversial statement, correct? Something becomes cheaper, you're going to buy more of it. At least not any less of it. There are some exceptions, but I don't really want to go there. Like nearly universally, this is true. Okay. And economists, again, call it the law of demand. Something gets cheaper, people buy more of it. So, are we good on that? Okay. We have a similar story for the opposite side of the market. So actually, let's see, I have 5 minutes. Let me say, before I go to supply, let me add a caveat to this, which is everything else the same. Okay? Assuming nothing else changes. There's a technical term in economics which you do not need to know, which is ceteris paribus. Okay, I myself never use that phrase, but it's something that economists sometimes throw around, or people, when talking about the economy, throw around. They say ceteris paribus. which is Latin or something for everything else the same. And what we're talking about is assuming that, like, um, if we're not changing income or preferences, these are the kinds of things that we're assuming. These things don't change. As long as we're comparing two scenarios where people have the same income, same preferences, same expectations. Okay. And a handful of other things. Income and preferences are the big ones. Prices of related goods. Okay. These are all things that can impact demand for a good. Like when people's income rises, it will change demand, but it will change the whole demand curve. Okay? These things, again, if those change, it alters the entire demand curve. Okay? So again, the law of demand is that price goes down, quantity demanded goes up, everything else is the same. Now, these other things that impact demand, they change the entire demand curve. For example, income. Okay? As people's income goes up, as income rises, okay, what happens to demand? Okay. Now, normally, people are willing and able to purchase more at all prices. So, in other words, quantity demanded increases at all prices. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, that's not true of all goods. So, economists draw a distinction between two types of goods. Some we call normal goods. So, as I said, normally, okay, that is a technical phrase. A normal good is one where, as income rises, demand increases. Now, be aware when I say demand increases, that means demand or the quantity demanded increases at each price. People are willing and able to purchase more at all prices. Okay, but there are also inferior goods. Okay, whereas income rises, demand decreases. An inferior good is one that you buy less of as you get wealthier. Think, for example, of, let's say, ramen noodles are the thing that I like to pick on. But, people eat ramen noodles. Why? Because they can't afford anything else. Okay, they're poor students, they can't afford anything else, so they buy ramen noodles. If you had more money, you would purchase fewer ramen noodles. That's an inferior good. Does that example make sense? Even though my kids, if they had more money, they would buy more ramen noodles, but anyhow, or used cars. Okay, people purchase used cars, but as incomes rise, demand for used cars falls. Well, right? People instead want to purchase new cars. So again, that's what we call an inferior good. When income rises, as income rises, demand falls at all prices. Okay. Is that good for today? Okay. So I'll continue talking about demand some on Tuesday. You're going to have no reading quiz this weekend since we've not done a ton since the last reading quiz. Okay, but we'll talk more on Tuesday about demand and then supply.